So let's talk about which Warhammer factions are rated most and least popular to play against in 10th edition, and some of the reasons that might be the case. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're talking armies and how popular they are to play against. For this video I thought it could be interesting to see people's opinions on which armies they like to face and which ones they don't, at least on a rough average sort of level, as there are always going to be things that are more or less popular to see on the other side of the table. This one's mainly done for interest and just trying to see what people's attitudes are out there, and certainly not to encourage any sort of faction hating, which I think can be genuinely unhelpful and a bit discouraging to people who have just started 40k. Sometimes it can be a bit dispiriting if you generally get a lot of bad feedback for people you turn up to play games with. Most of the time I think it's all meant in fairly good fun. I think that just about everyone would agree that the player on the other side of the table makes so much more difference than the exact army that they're playing. You could be playing against an army that's really popular to match against, but if they're cheating, behaving impolitely, and not chatting to you, it's going to be a much worse game experience than if in theory you were playing against one of the less favoured matchups. Then the person you were playing had put down a cool army and being very on theme and giving you a good gaming experience. Still though, I certainly was interested to see the results of this one, and this one comes from a recent channel poll of around 700 or so votes, asking people to rate each army in terms of enjoyment to play against. I also asked for people to give a little bit of feedback to say why they did or didn't like play against certain armies and factions. I feel like generally in Warhammer 40k there are a bunch of factions that make an army less popular to play against. Anything that's too strong or has been way too strong in recent memory is just harder to enjoy a game if you feel like there's pretty much no chance to win, and it's literally just Games Workshop's game balance that is making that happen. That's maybe doubled down on it if you've been matching up against that same army multiple times. Things that are a bit overplayed just get a bit boring. And then maybe beyond that, the armies that shut down the way that you like to play your army in one way or another tend to be less popular. Maybe skew lists that are nothing but, say, tank spam or extreme hordes with 250 or more models on the table, excessive movement tricks or shenanigans, or raw speed that just stop you from catching or destroying anything. Perhaps very heavy use of flyers, artillery, or fully ranged gun lines also tend to be a little bit less popular than having a bit more of a balanced army that you can interact with normally. None of these necessarily mean that the army is overly strong or anything, it just means that you might have limited options with how you deal with them, and not be quite as engaging game. Otherwise, aside from the player who's actually playing it, armies that aren't really well assembled or painted and things could also detract from enjoyment a bit, and a lot of people might prefer play against something that's painted than not. For the purposes of this one though, obviously that's going to vary player to player, so I'm going to more focus on the armies themselves. In any case, jumping straight into it, I thought we'd go through the most popular and the mid-popular ones, and then really focus on the armies that tend to be a little bit less popular, and some of the reasons that might be. It's perhaps not too surprising to see orcs right at the top of the list for most popular armies. They just generally have had a good reputation over the years in 40k, well known for being fun, aggressive, and a little bit random, and I feel like it's a common internet observation that orc players tend to have a good attitude to the game, maybe not being over serious about things, and maybe focusing more on the spectacle. Seems like recent shenanigans with incredibly durable mega knobs haven't dissuaded that, and I guess aren't likely to now that Games Workshop have nerfed them into the ground. Interestingly, it was Tyranids next at 69%, I guess they've got fun new models, and I feel like for most of 10th edition so far they've been a matchup that seems winnable for most armies. Perhaps a fair few newer players playing and a weaker faction overall has made them into a bit more of a favoured matchup, where most armies feel that they can play their army to the best of their ability. Otherwise, not really too sure exactly why they're quite so high here. Otherwise, both flavours of Chaos Space Marine and Space Marine are up here too, maybe tending to play at least fairly aggressively with punchy units and power armour that perhaps feel like they might engage most armies on their own terms. They can hit hard, but at least most of the time you can usually hit them back. And then in joint fifth we have a trio of other ones, Sisters of Battle, World Eaters, and Astra Militarum. Moving on to the middle of the pack, and we've got Blood Angels, Chaos Demons, Dark Angels, Death Guard, Admech Black Templars, Genestealer Cult, Death Watch, Space Wolves, Leagues of Votann, and Drukhari. They were all voted somewhere between 53% and 60% popular to play against, and I do find it interesting that out of the divergent chapters, the Blood Angels ranked the highest here. I feel like in general people enjoy playing armies that have to play aggressively, yet you can still destroy their units at least fairly easily. So I'm not really too surprised to see things like Blood Angels, World Eaters, and Orcs ranking fairly highly here. Big hitting, high risk and high reward armies tend to be at least fairly dynamic and interesting to play against. Towards the bottom of the list and just outside of our top 7 or so, there's Leagues of Votann with their big close range damage dealing, and also Drukhari as well, I sort of feel like Aeldari armies often tend to be a little bit less popular to play against than some, mainly due to needing to do a lot of shenanigans due to their nature, and maybe not tending to fight the opponent's army on their own terms so much. Getting into the armies that were rated in the lowest 7 though, first up we have Necrons, which were voted 52% popular to play against. I'll put the tournament win stats at the moment for them, though I feel like most people will probably be judging these armies on the previous half a year or so, whenever they last happened to play against them. Necrons do feel like an army that have a bunch of slightly annoying setups to fight against in 10th edition so far. They started out the edition with near unkillable Lich Guard and Warrior blocks that would just bounce back when you tried to deal some big damage to them. Not a lot more frustrating than dealing loads of damage to a unit and then casually seeing it heal back up to full health. Then they had their hilariously undercosted Catan when their Codex came out. Again ridiculously durable but also very dangerous as well. Fighting against multiples of those could be a bit of a slog. Then they had a bit of a balance redress, and maybe Canoptek Court was one of the more popular lists. Again, 18 Wraiths and triple Doomstalkers, plus the good support they had, could be fairly grim to face against, and they were still one of the stronger armies in the game. And maybe now they tend to be a bit more Hypercrypt Legion, at least in competitive play, and have a bit of frustration fighting weird phasing Necrons that you can never really be 100% sure of exactly where they're going to be on the board, and might be doing a fair bit of alpha striking, hitting you out of reserve with shooting units. Obviously, realistically, they're not really ranked all that low on this, kind of similar to the armies like Space Wolves, Leagues of Votan and Drukhari, but I feel like maybe just big durable units often tend to be a bit of a slog to play against for some people, and perhaps can sometimes feel a bit uninteractive in their own way. Next up in 6th place we have the Thousand Sons, voted 50% popular to play against. They've been really quite powerful for a while now, with tournament wins around about 55%. I guess that might be something that doesn't really have them seen as a good force to have on the other side of the table. I feel like with armies that have really powerful emphasis on rules that are off the board, they can often feel maybe a little bit of feels bad. And Thousand Sons did maybe keep the sort of essence and theme of the old 40k psychic phases, with their Kabbalistic rituals allowing them to do some pretty crazy things. They certainly do have their units costed for it, and it is their main army mechanic and theme replacing other things, but the feel of it can be quite brutal when the enemy pulls out, say, double moves, or a whole load of mortal wounds with Doom Bolt, or cancelling enemy saves outright, things that most armies can't do, even if they have all taken nerfs in their various ways, such as the cancelling saves thing only being AP-2 better at range now. Magnus himself tends to be a staple in Thousand Sons lists, and him moving 32 inches and throwing down some obscene psychic shooting with that double move ritual could be kind of brutal, particularly if you're not psychologically prepared that he could potentially do that. Otherwise, the standard Rubric Marine certainly can be annoying to fight on objectives. Big Warflamer Overwatch can shut down quite a few units, light infantry might really struggle to get close, and army lists in general can be a little bit cookie cutter, kind of the fault of Games Workshop for not really having too many options for them, but the vast majority of competitive lists start with Magnus Ahriman, loads of rubrics and sorcerers, maybe a Mutalith beast, could maybe get a little bit wearing if you're going to be playing Thousand Sons on the regular. Next up and voted in 5th least popular were the Grey Knights, just under Thousand Sons on the 49%. Again, they're pretty well balanced right now. Tournament wins around about 51% overall. In 10th edition, Grey Knights are basically the teleport shenanigans army of Warhammer 40k, basically all their units being able to phase on and off the board, always managing to get themselves in the rough right sort of position or potentially protect themselves from harm. And in that way it can maybe feel a little bit uninteractive. You're sort of having to move your units out into the mid-board, and then knowing that all the Grey Knight units are likely to be warping around you and changing positions. You often can't really 100% guarantee that any one thing is going to be exactly where it was at the start of the turn. I feel like the Mist of Deimos stratagem in particular is a pretty brutal one for that. If you move within 9 inches of a Grey Knight unit, they can just go back off into reserves, a massively powerful rule that could just really mess with what your units might want to do in a turn. It means that you could set up a unit to do hopefully a powerful charge and destroy a key threat, but then because of that stratagem, they just go away and your unit is left with nothing to do. The Sigil of Exigence could double down on that a bit as well. That's the one where a unit can basically disappear to shooting, and again can basically pull a unit off the board that you otherwise would have been able to destroy with ease. It doesn't mean that they're overpowered or anything like that. Their tournament stats seem really quite balanced, but they're certainly a bit more of a weird and trickier army to get to grips with some, and a little bit less scope for interaction than some armies too. In 4th we have the Tau Empire, who generally tend to be towards the lower end of these lists, voted 48% popular to play against by you guys. Again, really quite well balanced in terms of tournament competitive play right now, around about 49% wins. and in general Tau often just get a bit of a bad rap for being the dedicated ranged gunline army of Warhammer 40k, often historically having the right combination of big shooting damage and good movement to win firefights, and maybe being frustrating for armies that do things a bit more balanced with a bit of melee and a bit of shooting, as their close combat stuff might just get focused down by an excessive gun line as they try and get close. I say that tends to be more the case on tables where you're playing with very little terrain, or previously in Warhammer's history more so than in 10th. You usually can't really afford just to completely back off and fall on gun line and shoot down the enemy then score. You normally need to be at least fighting for the mid-board objectives early on. And if you're playing on competitive terrain sort of layouts, it means you're not going to be able to draw as good lines of sight across the board, and you're still going to have to make some big plays and get close and hit hard with things such as crisis suits or breaches. Otherwise, I guess maybe they could have a few units that are slightly feels bad to play against. Things like ghost kills with big guns that you can't shoot back with lone operative, even if realistically they do pay a big premium for having that. They can do some annoying chaff things in the midboard, like move blocking with piranhas, or using cheap things like that to score while the rest of their army stays safe. And I wouldn't be too surprised if a few people are still remembering and recovering from Cyclic Ion Blaster's crisis suit spam from early 10th. Having an enormous unit that can just jump down and eradicate your single most important unit is a pretty big blow, never mind the fact that they might do that again in your own turn with Overwatch. In terms of feel bad things though, I feel like in 10th they're far better than plenty of previous editions, say when drones could be tanking enormous anti-tank hits every single turn, so you could have a bunch of Riptides that you could basically never shoot, for example. Jump shoot jump with crisis suit units, or the really big Overwatch that hit on 5s with multiple units as they previously had before. Moving on, and voted in third place on this list were Adeptus Custodes, voted 44% popular to play against, and currently seem to be doing at least okay on the competitive scene. Tournament wins are around about 54%. They really have had quite a lot of ups and downs in 10th edition already. I feel like in general Custodes really tick the box very well as a stat check sort of army, where certainly it's a lot of more casual levels. If you built an army list that doesn't have an enormous amount of anti-elite or anti-tank shooting, then you're going to have a lot of units just completely bounce against theirs. Chainswords and bolt guns just aren't going to do very much against lots of toughness 6 2+ save armor, and good 4+ invulnerable saves can even make some of the anti-elite damage go away quite well. It can just be a bit disheartening to have a shooting phase with some of your units just do so little to an opponent if a Custodes squad is rolling well. Perhaps beyond that, they maybe do feel a bit weirdly common, just due to being one of the easiest armies in the game to get into. You only need a relatively cheap small elite force of models to get into the game with them. And when they do get strong, they can often be challenging for most played army in the game, at least at a competitive level. Their playstyle also tends to be at least fairly simplistic, usually some variation of marching up the board and trying to get into melee, and daring the opponent to come too close to them with their big golden blocks of armour. It means that several armies might need to play kind of cagey against the Custodes, and the one player can maybe cause the other person issues without really having to do anything too particularly clever. It's an army with quite a high skill floor but quite a high skill ceiling, maybe not quite as many tricks or shenanigans as previously. Perhaps their unit pool does tend to be a little bit small as well, so big golden battle line tends to be the way that most of them go. So again, could feel a little bit less varied than some if you're playing them on the regular. I was kind of interested to see that while they weren't voted the least popular army to play against, people commenting that they didn't really enjoy facing Custodes seemed to be one of the most common themes out of the channel post feedback, the big golden elites of the Emperor being somewhat of a problem to handle. Voted in second place in this list were the Aeldari. They were just under the Custodes, voted 43% popular to play against. I can't help but think that really quite a lot of this likely comes from how horrendously overpowered they were at the start of 10th edition. I think in general, the community perhaps has a slightly slow changing memory, as perhaps the last time that a lot of people will have played Aeldari might have been while they were overpowered, with their crazy 70% win rates, and they were still very, very strong for a long time after that. Currently in Pariah Nexus, it looks like they're initially fairly well balanced, around about 49% win rates. I think Aeldari do have a few things that wind people up a little bit when they play them. Powerful dice manipulation mechanics, I think, are rarely a particularly popular thing to see. Between battle host rerolls, rerolling a hit and a wound every time a unit attacks, plus the odd fate dice that you could throw in for things like devastating wound 6s with a Farseer. There's plenty of times where the dice are just going to be so likely that they do something. This almost feels like there's just not really all that much point rolling, even if with points increases and things, Aeldari units do take that into account now. Beyond that, the way that they tend to play at the moment tends to be lots of small fast moving units hiding around the board for most of the game. There's a lot of things that the Aeldari can use to hit you and then not get hit back. Phantasm can be a pretty powerful and scary reactive move for an infantry unit. Fire and Phase can get you to pop out of terrain, shoot something hard, and then hide again. Shadow Spectres, for those that use them, can do that at base. And things like Swooping Hawks and Warp Spiders can be bouncing around the board with crazy movement shenanigans. Very good for keeping the enemy on the back foot or scoring secondaries almost automatically. They've still managed to wind up with some of the most powerful and strong indirect firepower in the game as well, with support weapons and D-cannons, so there really is just quite a lot that could be hitting the opponent and frustrating them, and then still be presented with a board where you basically can't really see or shoot anything of massive consequence, not unless you manage to rapidly close the distance. Finally though, and both in top for least favourite armies to play against, are the Imperial and Chaos Knights. Both of these were fairly equally joined, tournament stats around about 50% win rates, so fairly well balanced overall. And again, maybe not too unexpected here, kind of like Adeptus Custodes, Knights just tend to be a skew list by nature, meaning that you're just playing really quite a different game of Warhammer 40k against them, trying to bring down an entire army of dangerous fighty vehicles, whether they're the big Titanic ones or mass war dogs or armigers. It can mean that just quite a lot of units aren't really all that much used in a game against knights, anything with a large amount of anti-infantry type attacks, and sometimes it can just be a bit of a stat check whether or not you brought enough anti-tank weapons to take down the knights, and how well you happen to roll with those weapons, and if the knight player can pass or fail those invulnerable saves. As with armies like Adeptus Custodes, Imperial and Chaos Knights generally tend to do better at a casual level versus a super competitive level, just due to usually being a bit more obvious and not really having quite as much scope for sneaky tricks. They tend to be at least a fairly easy army for newer players to use, sometimes able just to bowl over a de-optimized army with some big damage profiles. For Knights as well, there is often a bit of grumbling about them not really being a proper 40k army in one way or another, due to being an entire army of Titanic units that doesn't really fit with the same sort of scale or setting compared with other armies out there. That does seem to be something that comes up at least semi-regularly in YouTube comments. In general, I feel like it maybe gets a bit repetitive if you're just playing against the same sort of similar Imperial Knights or Chaos Knight list multiple times over. Certainly things like Chaos Knight War Dog spam could be very, very similar from one army to the other, and that might contribute a little bit. I must admit I was kind of surprised to see Knights rated as the single lowest though. I kind of expected they'd be on the sort of top 7 lowest list, though I wouldn't have necessarily guessed that they'd have been first place on it. Finally, I was kind of interested to see the comparison with the armies that were chosen on a similar sort of equivalent for the poll in late 9th edition. There's definitely a few things that have kept on the same list, but plenty of things that are very different. The top 2 armies for least favoured to play against at that time were Harlequins and Leagues of Votann. Harlequins just due to the absolutely crazy movement shenanigans and their special rules making them weirdly tough and hard to fight against for an army of space elves, and Leagues of Votann no doubt for their 9th edition judgment tokens, basically giving you horrendous amounts of auto wounds on the enemy, and that was a slog to fight against even after they were toned down. Otherwise, Tau and Custodes are still here, probably for similar kind of reasons, so are Knights and Aeldari and Drukhari as well. Aeldari seem to be far less popular in 10th, but I guess that's due to them being quite so strong towards the start of the edition. After these top 9 armies, it looks like the only one that's new from the 9th edition to the 10th edition one were Harlequins and then Dark Angels. 9th edition had Dark Angels, Deathwing Terminators only being able to be wounded on 4+, so a lot of strong Dark Angels lists often tended to get played kind of similar to, say, Custodes, a great big wall of Terminators marching up the boards that loads of enemies might struggle to deal with. In any case, looking forward to hearing your thoughts. Which armies do you most enjoy or least enjoy facing in Warhammer 40k right now, and why is that the case? Again, I certainly take all of this in context, and still keep in mind that it's certainly the player rather than the army that determines enjoyment of a game far, far more, even if army choice can sometimes be a factor to some people from a gameplay point of view. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming. I do tend to post new ones just about every day. Finally, if you've been enjoying all the videos on the channel, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description if you'd like to support the channel and keep all of these coming. Channel patrons do get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link is down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.